From Illinois Soul, this is Dialogue. I'm Reginald Hardwick, News and Public Affairs Director at Illinois Public Media. Dialogue is an exchange about culture straight from the soul. The presidency of John F. Kennedy meant a lot of firsts in America. He was the first Catholic president, the first and only president to have earned a Purple Heart, and he was the first president to entrust part of his security detail to a black person. That person was Illinoisan Abraham Bolden. Illinois Public Media's David Pierce has worked for more than a year to tell the story about Bolden, and he joins me in studio. Welcome back, David.
Thank you for having me, Reginald. Thank you for having me.
Where was Bolden born and raised?
So Abraham Bolden was born and raised in East St. Louis, Illinois.
And what sparked his interest in law enforcement?
I can't really tell you what sparked his interest, but what I can say is that when he began his career, it began to basically snowball. He went from being a detective, and then he went on to be an Illinois State Trooper, and then he became a Secret Service agent on a more local level in Chicago, which he would be, cracking the code on money crimes and different fraud cases.
What did Bolden say life was like for being a black Secret Service agent in the 1960s?
Well, to put it into context, this is the early 1960s. So, the civil rights movement is just taking off. Schools are being segregated at this point. But for him, this was a very traumatic experience. It was an honor to work on the president's detail, but he really struggled because a lot of his coworkers had some very bigoted and racist things to say and have done. In his book, he references how they've used the N-word around him many of times and carelessly. And when he would go to his superiors about it, they would basically tell him that you need to have tough skin and to, not be so serious.
How did Abraham Bolden come to meet President Kennedy?
President Kennedy was in town for basically a congratulations banquet of some kind, and he was meeting with Mayor Daley, and the Chicago market and Mayor Daley's politics had helped give JFK quite the boost in Illinois, at least in the Chicagoland area. And they were having dinner. This was a really big thing. This was held at the McCormick Place, and this was in 1961.
Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your generous welcome. This year I expect to attend 2 Democratic dinners, one in my home of Boston, Massachusetts, and the other in my second home of Chicago, Illinois.
So Abraham Bolden, already being a Secret Service agent, he was called to be a part of the staff to, just guard the perimeter of the McCormick Place, and they placed him at the bathroom. The interesting thing about that is that he felt that that was like the lowest of low job because it would be something that not many people would navigate. It was a downstairs bathroom at that. But lo and behold, President Kennedy had come down the stairs, and Abraham Bolden was guarding that bathroom. And President Kennedy asked Mr. Bolden, he said, "Are you a Secret Service agent, or are you a part of Mayor Daley's staff?" And he said, "I'm a Secret Service agent, Mr. President." He asked him, "Has there ever been a Negro on the president's detail?" He said, "Not to my knowledge, Mr. President." And from there, JFK was like, "How about you join me? How would you feel if you were brought onto my staff?" And he was like, I would appreciate that. And from there on, he became a part of JFK's security detail. JFK and Mr. Bolden were both at Hyannisport. Now, the interesting thing about it is that they were together, but Abraham Bolden, he said he would do this whole Secret Service experience all over again, but he would change one thing, and that is to let President Kennedy know that basically there were Secret Service agents that were saying, like, somebody should have him killed.
He had concerns about being trained in his training time. And what were some of those concerns?
And this is when Mr. Bolden would ask, what do I do if the president's life is at stake? And he said he would get told by colleagues that just play it by ear. And that is concerning in itself because, the president, he's the leader of the country. And, when there are known threats that exist and being told that to play it by ear, that was concerning for him because he felt that there was no real plan, along with given weapons that he wasn't trained to know how to use. But one of his also biggest concerns outside of also the racism that he had experienced, he was concerned by the fact that Secret Service agents were drinking on the job and partying with women and this would go on up until 7:30 in the morning when they would just be dropping these women off and then be heading to work at 8 o'clock shortly after. So just the lack of professionalism.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt this program to bring you a bulletin from WCBS Radio News. The story, as it is just being handed to me, is datelined Dallas, Texas. It says, according to the United Press, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade today in downtown Dallas. The incident occurred near the county sheriff's office.
So November 22nd, 1963, Dallas, Texas. President Kennedy is shot and dies of his wounds. Where was Abraham Bolden on that day?
So Abraham Bolden was actually back in Chicago after that training I had mentioned just a moment ago, and he was back to investigating money crimes and things like that. So he was at a bar in Chicago's Bronzeville neighborhood, which is a historically black neighborhood for those that don't know. And with him being there, as he's interviewing this bar owner about different crimes that are happening related to this location.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States is dead. John F. Kennedy has died of the wounds received in an assassination in Dallas less than an hour ago. We repeat.
And it just sent chills down his whole body because he had already felt that this was going to happen. He had different nightmares about this happening. And he had even spoke up to some of his colleagues like, hey, like, I have a, eerie feeling that something might happen to the president. And they had brushed him off. So to see that had actually happened, that was devastating for him.
What was his immediate reaction?
Well, he told me that he literally jumped in his squad car and he just drove back to the office. He sped. He said that he didn't even stop at one stoplight. And with having gone to the office, he goes in there and he is just like panicking, screaming bloody murder, as he's told me. And he's just like, I knew that this would happen. I told you all that this would happen. And there it was.
And also he felt a real connection to JFK.
Yeah, he felt that JFK was an honorable person by opening doors for black people at that time. And him as a black man being a part of such a transformative opportunity, he felt that was special because JFK had supported a lot of different movements with getting equality for black people. And Abraham Bolden really appreciated President Kennedy for doing that.
So shortly after that, there is a federal case that's leveled against Abraham Bolden. What was that all about?
So Abraham Bolden was accused of selling a Secret Service document to a known fraudster who he had arrested previously.
He is actually convicted and sent to prison. Tell me about the court case and the punishment.
The court case, he ends up going to trial, and it ends in a mistrial. From there, they go to a second trial, and he gets convicted. Abraham Bolden mentioned how there was one woman that was a juror that she was a black juror at that. She didn't believe that he was guilty. And Abraham Bolden mentions in his book that the judge working at the time, working that case, had influenced jurors to say that he was guilty. And he's sentenced to 6 years.
Federal prison.
Yeah, 6 years in federal prison. He was bounced around to all different places throughout the Midwest where he was placed at your traditional prison setup where there was, a yard and other prisoners. And he had been transferred to other facilities where he basically did manual work, like lawn work and very physical work like that. Towards the end of his sentence, he went to a facility in Missouri, which was basically those that have psychological needs. And from there, Abraham Bolden had shared how he was given this drug that caused him to basically be inebriated. And he said that the doctor that had given him this substance, he told Abraham Bolden that you won't even know your name.
And so I know there was a commission after President Kennedy's assassination. Was the idea to keep him from speaking on that commission or speaking to the commission?
It's funny that you asked that because he was in Washington, D.C. I believe he was preparing to speak because he was there for another training, and he was preparing to speak with the Warren Commission about what he believes happened. And in the midst of that training, he was only there for no more than maybe 72 hours. And he gets called back to Chicago to investigate a money crime, and in a predominantly white area, which he found strange. And it didn't make sense to him because he gets this call to come back to Chicago from Washington, D.C. in such a hurry. We already have your bags packed, just come back and we're going to get on the plane. And he can just feel something was off because just the silence and lack of information as to why he has to just be uprooted and shipped back to Chicago. And then he gets there and he's getting interrogated by his colleagues about this case that they've built of him possibly having sold this Secret Service document.
And that was before he was supposed to speak to the Warren Commission?
Yep.
So through all of this, of course, he doesn't go through this alone. Tell me about his family life and his wife who had to endure all of this with him.
Barbara, she held down the fort while he was gone. Barbara had supported him as he became higher and higher in ranks of law enforcement. They had 3 children together. And when he gets arrested on these accusations, she is the one that's holding the house together and constantly coming to see him even when he gets convicted. And she is the one that picked up another job before him having been convicted and continuing to raise in the family, and Abraham Bolden doing different odd jobs to raise money for his trial, taking out savings to spend for a lawyer, and which was also his fraternity brother at the time of Alpha Phi Alpha. And then he gets convicted after these 2 trials, after the second trial, and she was the one that would come see him and travel through the Midwest to come see him and, just comfort him.
How did he eventually leave prison, and was he ever exonerated of his crimes?
So he was able to leave prison early. he spent about 3.5 years in jail. He was exonerated by President Joe Biden in 2022. But him having been released from prison in the late 60s up until 2022, that decades-long, fight, he spent decades in between then fighting to have his record cleared and to be exonerated all throughout that time. And he would go to different Supreme Courts, and he had been denied. He would look for his files in different federal libraries, nowhere to be found. So when he finally got exonerated by President Joe Biden, that was something that he had long waited for.
What did he do after prison?
He went on to work as an engineer.
Did he ever get to speak about his concerns about the Kennedy administration?
He did get to speak with a committee of the federal government about, and this happened in 2025, where he did speak with a committee of the federal government about what had happened to him and how he felt that was an injustice against him.
Where is Abraham Bolden now, and what kind of condition is he in?
So Abraham Bolden is now 91 years old, and he is hanging in there. He's doing pretty well for himself, very alert, and, still so full of a lot of wisdom about American politics and the Black experience. He is, in a tough condition too as well, because he has Parkinson's disease. That makes it really hard for him to do some of the most basic things, which is, eat and, maybe get dressed and, use the bathroom and different things like that.
And his family is in Chicago as well. I know his wife has passed.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like to sit and just chat with him?
It was amazing because he is 91 years old, and to have this opportunity, it felt like once in a lifetime, because he could have passed away in the midst of us having been working on this story and preparing to do the interview.
And we've made that mini documentary available on WILL TV as well as the Illinois Public Media YouTube channel. David, thank you for bringing us this story, and thank you for talking about Abraham Bolden.
Of course. Thank you for having me, Reginald.